A hand closed hard around Alina Hartley's wrist and yanked her into the shadows before she could scream. "Quiet," a low voice warned against her ear, "unless you want every soul in this house to know you were listening at that door." Alina's heart slammed against her ribs. She had only meant to deliver a forgotten shawl to her new employer's study. Instead, she had frozen outside the half-open door, listening to two men speak in tones sharp enough to cut glass. And now a third man, someone who had clearly been watching the corridor the entire time, had caught her before she could slip away unseen. The grip on her wrist loosened the moment they reached the safety of an empty parlor, and Alina spun around to find herself facing Julian Ashworth, Duke of Ravenswood, the very man she had been hired 3 days earlier to work for. His gray eyes were sharp with something between anger and fear, and his jaw was tight enough that a muscle jumped beneath his skin. "You should not have been in that corridor," he said quietly. "I was bringing a shawl to Miss Alice's room and heard voices I did not expect," Alina answered, refusing to let her voice shake even though her pulse was still racing. "I did not mean to listen, Your Grace, but once I heard the words danger and the child, I confess I could not make myself walk away." Something flickered across his face, and for a moment Alina thought he might simply dismiss her on the spot, send her back to the small cottage she had left only days before with nothing but her trunk and her pride. Instead, he studied her for a long, silent moment, as though weighing whether she could be trusted with a secret that had already cost him more than she could yet imagine. "What exactly did you hear?" he asked. "Enough to know that someone means harm to your ward," Alina said honestly. "And enough to know that you are frightened, though you hide it well." Julian's shoulders dropped slightly, the fight going out of him for just a moment before his guard rose again. "If you repeat a single word of what you heard to anyone in this house, or beyond it, you will place a child's life in danger. Do you understand me, Miss Hartley?" "I understand," Alina said, "though I would ask that you trust me enough to tell me what I am protecting her from. I cannot help keep her safe if I am kept blind." For a long moment the Duke said nothing, staring at her as though she were a puzzle he had not expected to find inside his own home. Then, finally, he spoke, and the words he chose sent a fresh wave of cold fear through Alina's chest. "2 nights ago, a man came to my study uninvited and told me that unless I paid a sum I do not have, he would take Alice from these grounds before the month is out. He knows things about her birth that could destroy her future even if he never lays a hand on her. And I have reason to believe he has already placed someone inside this household to watch us." Alina's breath caught. "Someone inside the house?" "Yes," Julian said grimly. "Which means, Miss Hartley, that from this moment forward you must trust no one completely, myself included, until we discover who among my own staff has chosen to betray us." The words hung heavy in the quiet parlor, and Alina felt the full weight of what she had stumbled into settle over her shoulders. She had come to Ravenswood Hall seeking simple, honest work, a way to send money home to her younger brother and escape the empty cupboards of her old life. She had not expected to walk straight into a plot threatening to steal a child and ruin a family, nor had she expected her own safety to become tangled so quickly with a stranger's desperate secret. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said quietly, surprising herself with how steady her own voice sounded. Julian studied her again, something like grudging respect entering his tired eyes. "For now, watch Alice closely, and do not let her out of your sight when strangers are near, and watch the staff as well. Someone close to this family has already sold information for money, and I intend to find out who before that person sells something far more valuable than gossip." Over the following 2 days, Alina threw herself into her new duties with a wariness she had never needed before. She walked Alice to her lessons herself rather than allowing the housemaids to fetch her, checked twice that every door leading to the nursery was locked each night, and studied the faces of the household staff with careful, quiet attention, searching for any flicker of guilt or nervousness that might reveal the traitor hiding among them. Alice, thankfully, remained blissfully unaware of the danger circling her small world. She was 7 years old, bright-eyed and endlessly curious, prone to asking 100 questions before breakfast was even finished. She adored drawing pictures of birds and had already decided, within a single afternoon, that Alina was her favorite person in the entire house besides her uncle. "Do you think Uncle Julian looks tired lately?" Alice asked one afternoon, looking up from the sketch she was working on in the nursery window seat. "He has a great deal on his mind," Alina said carefully, choosing words that were honest without being frightening. "Grown-up matters that are not yours to worry about." "He always says that," Alice said with the particular sigh of a child who suspects she is being kept from something interesting. "But I am not as little as everyone thinks. I notice things too." Alina smiled despite the tightness in her chest, smoothing a stray curl back from the girl's forehead. "I am sure you notice a great deal more than anyone gives you credit for. But for now, let us finish this drawing before the light fades." That evening, after Alice had been tucked safely into bed, Alina made her way toward the kitchen for a cup of tea and found herself pausing outside the housekeeper's small office, where a candle still burned despite the late hour. Through the gap beneath the door she heard the housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Ferris, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone that made the hair on Alina's arms rise. "I have already told you everything I know," Mrs. Ferris whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The child sleeps in the East Nursery, the governess walks her to lessons each morning, and the Duke rarely leaves his study before midnight. I cannot give you more than that without someone noticing I am gone from my duties." Alina's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself flat against the wall beside the door, straining to hear more, but a second voice, low and muffled, seemed to be coming from beyond a window rather than inside the room itself, as though Mrs. Ferris were speaking to someone standing just outside in the dark. "You will give me more when I ask for it," the second voice said, cold and clipped, "or I will make certain your husband's debts become known to every creditor in this county before the week is finished." Alina did not wait to hear anything further. She turned and hurried back down the corridor as quietly as her trembling legs would allow, her mind racing with the terrible confirmation of exactly what Julian had feared. The traitor was not some distant enemy slipping through the gardens at night. The traitor was already inside the walls, sitting at their own table, tending their own fires, trusted with the daily rhythms of the household precisely because no one had thought to suspect her. She found Julian still awake in his study, exactly where she had expected him to be, a single candle burning low beside a stack of unread correspondence. He looked up sharply the moment she entered, reading the alarm on her face before she had even spoken a single word. "What happened?" he asked, rising immediately from his desk. "Mrs. Ferris," Alina said, her voice shaking despite her effort to remain calm. "I heard her speaking with someone outside the kitchen window just now. She is the one giving away information about this household, though it sounds as though she is being forced into it through threats against her husband." Julian's expression darkened with a mixture of anger and grim understanding. "Blackmail breeding further blackmail. Whoever threatens Alice has found a way to turn my own housekeeper into an unwilling weapon against this family." "What will you do?" Alina asked. "Tonight, nothing," Julian said, his jaw tight with restrained fury. "If I confront her too soon, whoever controls her may simply find another way in, someone we have not yet identified. We must be patient and careful, and above all else, we must ensure that Alice is never left alone, not even for a moment, until we understand exactly who we are truly facing." Alina nodded, though the fear coiling in her stomach refused to loosen even slightly. Somewhere beyond the walls of Ravenswood Hall, a man cold enough to threaten an innocent housekeeper's family was waiting, patient and calculating, for the perfect moment to strike at a child who had done nothing to deserve such danger. And now, whether she had asked for it or not, Alina understood that she stood directly between that danger and the little girl sleeping peacefully just down the hall, utterly unaware of the storm gathering above her small, trusting head. She did not sleep at all that night, listening instead to every creak of the old house, every distant sound carried on the wind, promising herself silently that whatever came next, she would not fail the child who had already, in such a short time, claimed a piece of her heart she had not expected to give so freely. The following morning, Julian summoned Mrs. Ferris to his study before the rest of the household had even risen, and Alina stood quietly near the window, watching the exchange with her heart pounding against her ribs. Mrs. Ferris entered with her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron, her face pale beneath the early light, as though she already sensed the reason behind such an early summons. "I know what you have been doing," Julian said, his voice controlled but carrying an edge sharp enough to make the housekeeper flinch. "I know someone outside this house has been forcing information from you. I do not intend to punish you for it, Mrs. Ferris, but I need the truth now, completely and without hesitation, or I cannot protect this household from whatever danger you have unwillingly invited inside it." Mrs. Ferris's composure crumbled almost instantly, tears filling her eyes as the weight of weeks of secrecy finally broke free. "My husband borrowed money from a man he should never have trusted, Your Grace. When he could not repay it, the debt was sold to someone far more dangerous, a man who calls himself Lord Halden, though I do not believe that is truly his title. He threatened to ruin my husband entirely, to see him thrown into debtor's prison, unless I told him everything happening within these walls. I never wanted to endanger Miss Alice. I swear it before God." "Lord Halden," Julian repeated slowly, recognition and fresh dread crossing his features. "I know that name. He has circled the edges of society for years, always searching for weakness to exploit, always hungry for money and influence he has never earned honestly." "What does he want with Alice specifically?" Alina asked, stepping forward despite the tension thick in the room. Julian's expression tightened further. "There are old rumors regarding Alice's true parentage, rumors that could bring both scandal and considerable inheritance disputes if certain documents were ever produced publicly. Halden must believe he can either extract a fortune from me in exchange for silence, or worse, that he can seize guardianship of Alice himself through manufactured claims, gaining control of whatever inheritance awaits her." Mrs. Ferris pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "He asked me, only yesterday, whether the child ever leaves the grounds unaccompanied. I told him no, but I fear he already suspects there may be an opportunity soon. There is a fair in the village this coming weekend. All the staff will be given leave to attend, and I told him as much before I understood the danger in doing so." Alina's stomach dropped. She turned to Julian, alarm plain on her face. If the household is thinner that day, with staff away enjoying the fair, it would be the perfect moment for someone to attempt to take her. "Precisely what I fear," Julian said grimly. "Mrs. Ferris, you will send no further word to this man, and you will tell him nothing more, regardless of what threats he makes against you. I will see to your husband's debt myself, quietly, so that this Halden loses whatever leverage he believes he holds over your family." Relief and disbelief flooded across the housekeeper's tired face. "Your Grace, I do not deserve such kindness after what I have done." "You were placed in an impossible position by a cruel man," Julian said, his voice softening slightly. "That is not the same as choosing to betray this family out of malice, but from this moment forward, I need your absolute loyalty and your silence regarding everything discussed in this room." Mrs. Ferris nodded fervently before hurrying from the study, leaving Julian and Alina alone with the grim knowledge that whatever danger Lord Halden intended, it was likely to arrive within days rather than weeks. Alina felt the fair fast approaching like a shadow lengthening across the calendar, each passing hour bringing them closer to whatever plot the man was constructing in the darkness beyond their walls. "We cannot simply keep Alice locked inside the house indefinitely," Alina said, thinking quickly. "She would notice, and it might raise questions among the staff that could reach the wrong ears. Perhaps it would be wiser to let her attend the fair as planned, but surrounded by more protection than Halden expects to find." Julian considered this carefully. "You suggest we use his own assumption against him." "Exactly," Alina said. "If he believes the household will be thin on the day of the fair, let him believe it, but arrange for trusted men to watch from a distance, unseen, ready to act the moment he shows himself." Julian's eyes sharpened with grim approval. "I know a man who might help. Captain Nathaniel Cole served with my brother years ago, and has since made a quiet living investigating matters too delicate for the local magistrate. He owes me a debt from long ago, and I believe he would agree to help without drawing unwanted attention. That same afternoon, a letter was dispatched to Captain Cole, and by the following evening he arrived at Ravenswood Hall dressed plainly, his sharp eyes and controlled movements marking him immediately as a man accustomed to danger. He listened carefully as Julian explained the situation, nodding at intervals, his expression growing more serious with each new detail. "Haldon is a dangerous man precisely because he is patient," Captain Cole said once Julian had finished. "He will not act rashly or clumsily. If he intends to take the child at the fair, he will have planned an escape route already, likely a carriage waiting nearby, perhaps even a second man to create a distraction while the first moves toward the child." "How do we stop him without endangering Alice further?" Elinor asked, her voice tight with worry. "We do not confront him directly in a crowd," Captain Cole said. "That risks panic, and panic creates opportunities for a man like Haldon to slip away, or worse, to use the chaos to his advantage. Instead, we watch, we wait, and we let him reveal his hand before we move against him. I will position 2 of my own men near the fairground entrance and along the road leading out of the village, in case he attempts to flee with her." The following days passed in a blur of careful preparation. Elinor spent extra time with Alice, teaching her without frightening her, simple instructions to follow if a stranger ever tried to lead her away, phrasing the lessons as a game rather than a warning. Alice, delighted by what she believed was simply a new kind of adventure story, practiced calling out loudly and running straight back toward any familiar adult the moment something felt wrong, entirely unaware of how real the danger truly was. On the morning of the fair, Ravenswood Hall buzzed with the light, excited energy of servants preparing for their rare day of leisure, utterly unaware of the tension coiled tightly beneath the surface of the household's carefully maintained calm. Elinor dressed Alice in a simple blue frock, brushing her dark curls with hands that trembled only slightly, and reminded her gently to stay close throughout the day. The village square, when they arrived, was already crowded with color and noise, stalls selling ribbons and sweets, musicians playing lively tunes near the fountain, children running between the legs of laughing adults. Elinor kept Alice's small hand firmly clasped in hers, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd for any face that lingered too long, any figure that seemed more interested in watching than enjoying the festivities. It was nearly midday, as Alice tugged Elinor eagerly toward a puppet show gathering a crowd near the church steps, that Elinor first noticed him. A tall man in a dark gray coat stood near the edge of the square, his attention fixed not on the performance drawing everyone else's eye, but directly on Alice, his expression calculating in a way that sent immediate ice through Elinor's veins. "Alice," Elinor said quietly, tightening her grip on the girl's hand, "we are going to walk toward Uncle Julian now quickly, just as we practiced." Alice, sensing the sudden shift in Elinor's tone despite her attempt to remain calm, nodded seriously and began walking briskly beside her, no longer distracted by the puppet show. Elinor guided her through the crowd, weaving between stalls and laughing families, her heart hammering as she glanced back once to find the man in the gray coat now moving with clear purpose, cutting through the crowd toward them with unsettling speed. She spotted Julian near the ribbon stall exactly where he had promised to wait, and relief flooded through her chest as she hurried Alice the final few steps toward him. But before they could reach him fully, a second man stepped directly into their path, blocking the way with deliberate, casual ease that felt anything but accidental. "Excuse me," the man said pleasantly, though his eyes carried none of the warmth in his voice. "Might I trouble the young lady for directions to the church?" Elinor's blood ran cold, recognizing instantly the distraction Captain Cole had warned them about. Behind her, she could hear the first man's footsteps growing closer, and every instinct in her body screamed to move, to run, to get Alice away from both approaching threats before the trap could fully close around them. Elinor did not wait for the stranger to finish his question. She pulled Alice sharply to the side, ducking around a fruit stall, ignoring the startled shout of the vendor as a basket of apples tumbled to the ground behind them. Alice, wide-eyed but steady, kept pace beside her exactly as they had practiced, her small legs moving quickly despite the fear now plainly visible on her young face. "Julian," Elinor called out, her voice cutting sharply through the noise of the fair. He turned instantly, and the moment his eyes found her, his expression shifted from casual watchfulness to immediate alarm. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, scooping Alice up into his arms just as the man in the gray coat rounded the fruit stall, his earlier calm demeanor now replaced by open urgency. "Halden," Julian said sharply, recognition and fury darkening his voice as the man skidded to a stop only a few feet away, clearly having not expected to be identified so quickly. Lord Halden's expression flickered with brief surprise before settling into cold amusement. "Ashworth, how fortunate to find you here as well. I merely wished to greet your charming ward." "You will come nowhere near her," Julian said, positioning himself firmly between Halden and the child now clinging tightly to his neck. Around them, the crowd had begun to notice the tension, curious faces turning toward the confrontation despite the ongoing puppet show still drawing cheerful laughter only a short distance away. Elinor scanned the square desperately, searching for any sign of Captain Cole or his men, relief flooding through her chest when she spotted two plainly dressed figures moving purposefully through the crowd toward them. Halden noticed the shift in the atmosphere as well, his eyes flicking briefly toward the approaching men before returning to Julian with calculated composure. "You misunderstand my intentions entirely, Your Grace. I am simply a concerned citizen who has heard troubling rumors about the true circumstances of that child's birth. Surely a public square is the appropriate place to discuss matters of legitimate concern." "You are the only source of those rumors," Julian said coldly, "spread deliberately to create exactly this kind of confrontation. I know precisely what you attempted through my housekeeper, and I know exactly what you intended today." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Halden's face, quickly masked behind renewed composure. "I do not know what you mean." "Then perhaps you would care to explain your presence here to the magistrate instead," Captain Cole said, arriving at Julian's side with his two companions flanking him, their stances relaxed but clearly ready to act should Halden attempt to flee. For a long moment, Halden's eyes darted between the growing number of witnesses now surrounding him, calculating whether any avenue of escape remained open. Elinor watched his expression shift through several possibilities before finally settling into something colder and more resigned, the look of a man recognizing, however reluctantly, that his plan had failed to unfold as intended. "This is far from finished, Ashworth," Halden said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only those closest could hear the threat clearly. "You may have won today, surrounded by your hired protectors and your frightened governess, but I possess documents that will prove far more difficult for you to outmaneuver than a simple confrontation at a village fair." "What documents?" Elinor asked, unable to stop herself despite the danger still radiating from the man before them. Halden's gaze shifted to her, assessing, calculating. "Ah, the governess who dared to interfere. You should have remained in whatever cottage you crawled out from, Miss Hartley. Matters of inheritance and legitimacy are far beyond your understanding." "Enough," Julian said sharply, stepping forward with Alice still held protectively against his chest. "Whatever documents you claim to possess, produce them through proper legal channels if you believe they hold any truth. Threatening a child in a public square only proves how little legitimate ground you actually stand upon." Halden's jaw tightened, clearly recognizing that he had lost whatever advantage he believed the confrontation might have offered him. Without another word, he turned and melted quickly into the crowd, Captain Cole's men moving to follow at a discreet distance, tracking his movements without revealing themselves as pursuers. Julian did not release Alice from his arms until they had returned safely to the carriage, and even then, his hand remained firmly on her shoulder throughout the entire ride back to Ravenswood Hall, as though letting go completely might somehow allow the danger to reach her again. Elinor sat across from them, her own hands still trembling from the encounter, replaying every moment of the chase through her mind, searching for anything they might have done differently, anything that might have kept them from coming so close to disaster. "He mentioned documents," Elinor said quietly once they were safely behind the iron gates of the estate. "What could he possibly mean?" Julian's expression grew troubled as he set Alice down gently, watching her hurry off toward the nursery with a housemaid summoned specifically to keep close watch over her for the remainder of the evening. Once she was safely out of earshot, he turned back to Elinor, his shoulders sagging slightly under the weight of exhaustion and worry. "There are certain papers regarding Alice's birth," he said slowly, "documents that were meant to remain private, kept only within trusted family records. If Haldon has somehow obtained copies or forged versions convincing enough to pass scrutiny, he could use them to challenge my guardianship entirely, or worse, to claim some fabricated right to control her inheritance himself." "Is that even possible?" Elinor asked, alarmed. "Could a stranger truly seize guardianship through false papers?" "With enough money to bribe the right officials, and enough patience to construct a convincing enough story, unfortunately, yes," Julian admitted grimly. "The law does not always favor truth over cleverly presented deception, particularly when the truth involves circumstances society prefers to judge rather than understand." Elinor felt a fresh wave of fear settle over her, understanding now that the danger facing this fragile, unconventional family extended far beyond a single confrontation at a village fair. Whatever Haldon intended, he had clearly been planning for far longer than the few weeks since Elinor's own arrival at Ravenswood Hall, weaving a web of forged legitimacy and coerced informants with the patient determination of a man who believed, with cold certainty, that he could ultimately win. "Then we must move faster than he does," Elinor said, steadying her own voice with sheer determination. "If he intends to use false documents against you, we must find proof of their falsehood before he ever brings them before a magistrate." Julian studied her for a long moment, something like grateful admiration flickering behind his tired eyes. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Hartley. Most women in your position would have fled this household the moment danger revealed itself. Instead, you seem determined to fight alongside us." "Alice has become dear to me in a very short time," Elinor said honestly. "And so, I confess, have you, Your Grace, I do not intend to abandon either of you simply because the path ahead has grown difficult." A faint, exhausted smile touched Julian's lips, the first genuine warmth Elinor had seen from him since the confrontation at the fair. "Then let us begin at once. Captain Cole mentioned he has contacts who might help trace the origin of any documents Haldon intends to use. If we can prove them forged before he ever presents them publicly, we remove his weapon entirely before he has the chance to wield it." That evening, after Alice had finally been settled into an uneasy sleep, Elinor sat with Julian and Captain Cole in the study, poring over old family records, searching for any discrepancy or clue that might reveal exactly what falsehoods Haldon intended to construct. The candles burned low as the hours passed, the three of them piecing together fragments of the puzzle late into the night, united by a shared determination that whatever storm was still gathering beyond the walls of Ravenswood Hall, they would face it together, prepared and unwilling to surrender an innocent child's future to a man motivated purely by greed and cruelty. 3 days of careful investigation finally produced a name. Captain Cole's inquiries led them to a clerk named Edwin Marsh, formerly employed within the county records office, dismissed the previous year under a cloud of suspicion regarding missing documents that had never been fully explained. Marsh had a reputation for skillful penmanship and a weakness for gambling debts that made him precisely the kind of man willing to sell his talents to whoever paid the highest price. If Haldon required forged papers convincing enough to withstand scrutiny, Captain Cole explained, spreading a hand-drawn map of the county across Julian's desk, Marsh is almost certainly the man responsible for creating them. He lives now on the edge of town, in rooms above a tavern known for attracting men with more debts than scruples. "Then we must speak with him directly," Julian said, already reaching for his coat. Carefully, Captain Cole warned. If Marsh believes exposing Halden's scheme will cost him his own freedom, he may refuse to cooperate entirely, or worse, warn Halden that his plan has been discovered before we have gathered enough proof to act against him. Aliner, who had insisted on accompanying them despite Julian's initial reluctance, spoke up firmly. Then offer him something greater than fear. Men like that respond more readily to opportunity than threats. If we offer him protection from whatever consequences Halden might inflict for betraying him, along with assurance that his own crimes will be treated leniently in exchange for honest testimony, he may find honesty considerably more appealing than continued loyalty to a man who clearly views him as expendable. Julian considered this thoughtfully before nodding. A reasonable strategy. Let us hope Marsh proves as practical as you suggest. They found Edwin Marsh exactly where Captain Cole's information had suggested, hunched over a small table in a dimly lit tavern room, his fingers stained with ink, and his expression already wary the moment 3 well-dressed strangers appeared in his doorway. He rose quickly, clearly considering flight, until Captain Cole's calm but firm presence in the doorway made escape impossible. "We are not here to harm you," Julian said, keeping his voice level despite the tension evident in his shoulders. "We wish only to discuss certain documents you may have recently prepared on behalf of a man named Halden." Marsh's face paled considerably, though he attempted, unsuccessfully, to maintain an expression of confused innocence. "I do not know what you are speaking of." "We have witnesses who can place you in Halden's company on multiple occasions over the past 2 months, Captain Cole said, bending the truth slightly for effect, though the bluff proved effective as Marsh's composure crumbled almost instantly. "He forced my hand," Marsh said, his voice tight with fear and something close to genuine regret. "I owed money I could not repay, and he threatened to see me imprisoned for debts unless I created papers claiming legitimate parentage for a child, papers meant to appear as though they had come from official county records years ago." Aliner felt a surge of vindication mixed with fresh anger. "Then you can testify that the documents are false." "If I do," Marsh said, glancing nervously toward the door as though Halden might materialize from the shadows at any moment, "he will see me ruined or worse. He is not a man who forgives betrayal easily." "We can offer you protection," Julian said, "and I promise you, whatever debt you fear from Halden's retaliation, it pales in comparison to the mercy the law may show a man who comes forward willingly with evidence of another man's crime, rather than one caught still tangled within it." Marsh hesitated for a long, agonizing moment before finally nodding, exhaustion and relief flooding across his tired features. "There is a second set of documents, ones I have not yet delivered to him, hidden in this very room. They would prove beyond doubt that the papers he intends to present as authentic county records are forgeries created only weeks ago, not decades as he claims." Within the hour, Marsh had retrieved a small bundle of papers from beneath a loose floorboard, evidence that would, if properly presented, unravel every claim Halden intended to use against Julian's guardianship of Alice. Aliner felt hope rising cautiously within her chest for the first time since the confrontation at the fair, though a lingering unease still whispered that a man as dangerous as Halden would not simply accept defeat once his scheme collapsed. That unease proved justified far sooner than she expected. They returned to Ravenswood Hall well after midnight, the precious evidence secured carefully within Julian's coat, only to find the household in quiet chaos. Servants gathered anxiously in the entrance hall, candles burning in every window. "What has happened?" Julian demanded, alarm sharpening his voice as Mr. Griggs hurried forward to meet them. "Someone attempted to enter the nursery through the garden window not an hour ago, Your Grace," Griggs said, his usually composed voice shaking slightly. "One of the housemaids heard a noise and raised the alarm before the intruder could gain entry. He fled into the darkness before we could catch him, but Miss Alice is safe. We moved her immediately to a locked room near the servants' quarters, under close watch." Julian did not wait for further explanation. He pushed past the assembled staff and hurried up the stairs 2 at a time, Alina close behind him, her heart pounding with terror at how close disaster had come while they had been away chasing evidence in a town 3 miles distant. They found Alice curled beneath a thick blanket in a small, plainly furnished room, awake despite the late hour, her eyes wide with fright but her small chin held bravely steady. "I heard the window," she said the moment Julian gathered her into his arms, "just like we practiced. I called out loudly and ran, just as you and Miss Alina taught me." "You did wonderfully well, sweetheart," Julian murmured against her hair, relief and lingering terror mixing plainly in his voice. "I am so proud of you." Alina sank into a chair beside the bed, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her, the full weight of how close they had come to catastrophe finally crashing over her now that the immediate danger had passed. Julian caught her eye over Alice's head, and in that shared glance, Alina saw her own fear and fury mirrored perfectly in his exhausted expression. Later, once Alice had finally drifted into uneasy sleep, cradled safely between 2 watchful housemaids stationed at her bedside, Julian and Alina stood together in the quiet corridor outside her door, neither quite ready to retreat to their separate rooms, while the memory of the night's danger still hung so heavily around them. "We were so close to losing her tonight," Julian said quietly, his voice raw with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show so openly. "But we did not," Alina said gently, reaching out to take his hand without fully considering the boldness of the gesture. "She is safe, Julian. And now we possess the very proof that can end this threat permanently, if we move quickly and carefully." He looked down at their joined hands, something shifting softly behind his tired eyes. "I do not know how I would have survived these past weeks without your steadiness beside me, Alina. You arrived in this house as a stranger, and within a matter of weeks, you have become someone I find myself relying upon more than I ever expected to rely on anyone again." Alina's breath caught at the quiet sincerity in his voice, the walls he so carefully maintained around the rest of the world clearly lowered, if only for this single fragile moment between them. "I did not expect to care so deeply, so quickly either," she admitted softly. "But I find that I do, Julian. More than I know how to properly explain." For a long moment, neither of them moved, the tension of the night slowly transforming into something quieter and far more tender, an unspoken understanding passing between 2 people who had faced danger together and emerged, however shaken, still standing side by side. It was Julian who finally closed the small distance remaining between them, pressing a soft, unhurried kiss to Alina's forehead rather than her lips, a gesture that felt somehow more intimate for its restraint. "Rest now if you can," he murmured. "Tomorrow we finish what Haldon began, and we end this threat once and for all." Alina nodded, though sleep felt impossibly distant with her heart still racing from everything the night had brought, both the terror of nearly losing Alice and the quiet, unexpected warmth blooming steadily between herself and the guarded, grieving man she had come to care for so deeply in such a short span of time. Morning brought grim determination rather than rest, for neither Julian nor Alina had managed more than an hour or 2 of broken sleep before rising to prepare for what needed to happen next. Captain Cole arrived early, his expression serious as he reviewed the forged documents alongside Marsh's signed confession, both now secured carefully within a locked case Julian intended to present before the county magistrate that very afternoon. "Haldon will not simply allow this evidence to reach the magistrate unchallenged," Captain Cole warned as they prepared to depart. "A man capable of forgery and attempted kidnapping will not hesitate to attempt something far more desperate once he realizes his scheme has unraveled entirely." "What do you suggest?" Julian asked, tightening the strap on the leather case containing their evidence. "That we travel with more protection than usual, and that we do not announce our route in advance to anyone beyond this room," Captain Cole said. "If Haldon has eyes anywhere within this household still, even after Mrs. Ferris's cooperation, we cannot risk him learning our plans before we reach the magistrate safely." Alina insisted on accompanying them once more, despite Julian's clear reluctance to place her in further danger. Alice needs someone she trusts nearby, and I refuse to remain behind wondering whether you have arrived safely while imagining every terrible possibility," she said firmly. And after a long moment of studying her determined expression, Julian relented, understanding that arguing further would only waste time they could not afford to lose. Alice, meanwhile, was placed under the careful watch of 2 trusted housemaids and Mr. Griggs himself, with strict instructions that she was not to leave the house under any circumstances until Julian returned. The little girl, sensing the seriousness in the adults around her despite their attempts to shield her from the full weight of the danger, clung tightly to Alina before they departed. "You will come back," Alice said, not quite a question, though worry colored her young voice. "I promise you," Alina said, kneeling to meet her eyes directly. "Nothing in this world could keep me from returning to you, sweet girl. Stay close to Mr. Griggs, and be brave just a little while longer." The carriage ride toward the county seat felt longer than its actual distance warranted, tension coiling tighter with every passing mile. Captain Cole's men rode alongside on horseback, their presence a small comfort against the ever-present fear that Haldon might attempt something desperate before they ever reached the safety of the magistrate's office. Alina watched the passing countryside with unseeing eyes, her mind cycling endlessly through every possible danger that might still lie ahead. They were perhaps 2 miles from the county seat when the first sign of trouble appeared. A fallen tree blocked the narrow road ahead, positioned in a manner too deliberate to be mistaken for natural accident. Captain Cole's expression hardened immediately as he called for the carriage to halt, his sharp eyes scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of movement among the trees. "An ambush," he said quietly, drawing a pistol from beneath his coat with practiced ease. "Haldon must have anticipated our route despite our precautions." Before anyone could react further, 2 men emerged from the tree line, weapons drawn, their intentions clear even before either of them spoke a single word. Alina's heart hammered against her ribs as Julian pulled her instinctively behind him, positioning his own body between her and the approaching threat, while Captain Cole's men moved quickly to flank the attackers from either side. "Give us the case," one of the men demanded, his voice rough and impatient, "and no one needs to come to harm." "You are already trespassing against a duke's carriage on a public road," Captain Cole called back, his own weapon steady despite the tension crackling through the air. "Surrender now, and whatever punishment awaits you will be far less severe than continuing to serve a man who has already abandoned any pretense of legitimate ambition." The 2 men exchanged a brief, uncertain glance, clearly not having anticipated such organized resistance. In that moment of hesitation, Captain Cole's men moved decisively, closing the distance before either attacker could fully commit to their threat. A brief, chaotic scuffle followed, shouts and the scrape of struggling bodies filling the quiet forest road, until both attackers found themselves disarmed and restrained, their bravado collapsing entirely once the balance of power had shifted so swiftly against them. "Who sent you?" Julian demanded, stepping forward once the immediate danger had passed, though his arm remained protectively positioned in front of Alina. Neither man answered immediately, though the fear evident in their expressions suggested they understood exactly how much trouble they had invited by attacking a duke's party in broad daylight. Captain Cole crouched before them, his voice low and dangerous in a way Alina had not heard from him before. "You can tell us now, quietly, and perhaps find some leniency when this reaches the magistrate," he said. "Or you can remain silent and discover exactly how unforgiving the law becomes toward men caught attacking nobility on a public road. Your choice." The younger of the 2 attackers broke first, his composure crumbling under the weight of fear and exhaustion. "Haldon," he admitted, his voice shaking. "He promised payment if we stopped your carriage and retrieved whatever case the Duke carried. He said it contained nothing more than business papers, nothing worth risking violence over. He did not tell us we would be facing armed men prepared for exactly this." "Where is Haldon now?" Julian asked sharply. "He said he would be waiting at the old mill outside town," the man admitted, expecting us to bring the case to him there once the task was finished. Captain Cole rose, exchanging a meaningful glance with Julian. Then perhaps it is time we paid Lord Halden an unexpected visit of our own, rather than allowing him to wait indefinitely for men who will not be returning. The remainder of the journey to the county seat proceeded without further incident. The two attackers left securely bound near the roadside for the local constable to collect, while Captain Cole dispatched one of his own men to alert the magistrate's office of the ambush and the evidence they carried. By the time they finally arrived at the courthouse, word of the confrontation had already begun spreading, and Magistrate Foreman received them with grave attention, clearly understanding the seriousness of a case that had already escalated into attempted robbery and violence upon a public road. Julian laid out the evidence methodically, the forged documents alongside Marsh's signed confession, explaining in careful detail the entire scheme Halden had constructed over the preceding months, from coercing Mrs. Ferris through threats against her husband, to fabricating false records regarding Alice's birth, to the attempted kidnapping at the village fair, culminating finally in this morning's violent ambush upon the very road leading to the magistrate's own office. Magistrate Foreman listened with growing outrage, examining the forged papers alongside genuine county records that Captain Cole had also secured, the discrepancies becoming plain even to untrained eyes once properly compared. "This is damning evidence indeed, Your Grace," the magistrate said finally, setting the papers down with grim finality. "I will issue a warrant for Lord Halden's immediate arrest on charges of forgery, extortion, and conspiracy toward kidnapping. Given the violence displayed this very morning, I will also authorize whatever force proves necessary to bring him into custody safely." Relief flooded through Aliner's chest, though it remained tempered by lingering unease, knowing that Halden himself had not yet been captured, and knowing precisely how dangerous a cornered man could become once he understood his schemes had finally collapsed entirely around him. "He is waiting at the old mill outside town," Julian said, expecting his men to deliver stolen evidence to him there. Magistrate Foreman nodded sharply, already calling for constables to accompany them. "Then let us not keep him waiting any longer than necessary. I imagine Lord Halden is due for a rather unpleasant surprise." The old mill sat at the edge of a slow-moving river, its wooden structure weathered and half abandoned, the kind of place a man might choose precisely because no honest business ever brought visitors near it. Magistrate Foreman's constables approached carefully, spreading out along the tree line while Captain Cole and Julian moved closer to assess the situation before committing to any direct confrontation. Aliner remained behind with the carriage as instructed, though every instinct screamed at her to follow, her hands clenched tightly in her lap as she watched the men disappear into the trees surrounding the mill. The waiting proved almost unbearable, each passing minute stretching endlessly as she strained to hear any sound that might indicate what was unfolding beyond her sight. Inside the mill, Julian and Captain Cole found Lord Halden pacing impatiently near a dust-covered grain wheel, clearly growing suspicious at his men's delayed arrival. He turned sharply the moment their footsteps echoed against the wooden floorboards, his expression shifting rapidly from irritation to cold calculation, as he recognized exactly who had come to find him instead of the men he had been expecting. "Ashworth," Halden said, his voice carrying forced calm despite the tension visible in his rigid posture. "I confess I expected different visitors this morning. Your men are currently in the custody of the local constable," Captain Cole said evenly, stepping further into the mill with his weapon still drawn, "along with a full confession of everything you have orchestrated these past several months." Halden's composure flickered, though he attempted, with visible effort, to maintain some semblance of dignity. "I do not know what fabricated tale you have constructed, but I assure you, whatever accusations you intend to level against me will prove far more difficult to substantiate than you imagine. Edwin Marsh has already confessed to forging documents on your instruction," Julian said, stepping forward with cold fury barely restrained beneath his controlled voice. "Mrs. Ferris has confirmed the threats you made against her husband to extract information from within my own household, and the men you sent this morning to ambush my carriage have already named you as the one who ordered the attack. The color drained slowly from Halden's face as the full weight of his unraveling scheme finally settled over him. The calculated confidence he had worn like armor throughout the entire confrontation beginning visibly to crack. His eyes darted toward the mill's back entrance, calculating, weighing whether flight remained a viable option despite the armed men now blocking his path. "Do not," Captain Cole warned, his voice sharpening as he noticed the direction of Halden's gaze. "Constables surround this building on every side. There is no path remaining open to you, Halden, save the one leading directly to the county jail." For a long, tense moment, Halden remained frozen, clearly weighing some final, desperate option. Then, with startling suddenness, he lunged not toward the exit, but toward a nearby table where a pistol lay half hidden beneath a folded cloth. Julian moved instinctively, closing the distance between them before Halden's fingers could fully close around the weapon, and the two men crashed together in a violent, chaotic struggle that sent the table clattering to the floor. Eleanor, still waiting anxiously beside the carriage, heard the sudden commotion echoing from within the mill and could not force herself to remain still a moment longer. She hurried toward the structure despite every warning that had been given, arriving just as constables poured through the front entrance, drawn by the sound of the struggle, in time to see Captain Cole finally wresting the pistol free from Halden's desperate grip, while Julian pinned the man firmly against the dusty floorboards. "It is over, Halden," Julian said, breathing heavily, though his voice carried absolute finality. "Whatever you hoped to gain through cruelty and deception, it ends here today, permanently." Constables moved quickly to secure Halden in irons, hauling him roughly to his feet despite his continued futile protests of innocence, his earlier composure entirely shattered, replaced now by bitter, impotent fury as he realized precisely how thoroughly his elaborate scheme had collapsed. Eleanor watched from the doorway, relief flooding through her chest so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled beneath her. "Eleanor," Julian said, spotting her immediately as he straightened from the confrontation, concern flashing across his features despite his own disheveled appearance. "You should not have followed. It was not safe." "I could not simply wait not knowing whether you were safe," Eleanor said honestly, closing the distance between them despite the dust and lingering tension still hanging in the air. "I am glad you are unharmed." Julian's expression softened considerably as he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that felt entirely out of place amid the chaos surrounding them. "It is finished now. Halden will answer for everything he has done, and Alice will finally be safe from his schemes." But even as relief settled over the small gathering within the mill, a sudden shout from outside shattered the fragile calm. One of the constables burst through the entrance, his expression urgent. "Your Grace, a rider has just arrived from Ravenswood Hall. There is trouble back at the estate." Ice flooded through Eleanor's veins as Julian's face drained of color entirely. "Alice," he said, already moving toward the door before the constable could offer any further explanation. They found the messenger, a stable boy barely older than 14, breathless and pale, having ridden hard the entire distance from the estate. "A man arrived not an hour ago," the boy explained between gasping breaths, claiming to carry urgent papers requiring the Duke's immediate signature. Mr. Griggs grew suspicious and refused him entry, but the man attempted to force his way past the front door before fleeing when the stable hands intervened. "Miss Alice is safe, Your Grace, but Mr. Griggs feared you should know immediately, in case this stranger returns with different intentions." Halden had a second man in place, unaware his employer had already been captured, Captain Cole surmised grimly. "We must return to the estate at once, both to secure it further and to ensure whoever attempted entry does not try again believing his plan remains intact." The ride back to Ravenswood Hall felt like the longest of Eleanor's entire life, every mile stretching unbearably as fear for Alice's safety consumed her thoughts entirely. Julian rode beside the carriage rather than within it, unable to bear the confinement while uncertainty still hung over his daughter's safety. His horse pushed to its fastest pace across the countryside, separating them from home. They arrived to find the household in a state of tense but controlled alertness, extra stable hands positioned near every entrance. Mr. Griggs himself standing guard at the front door with a determined expression that softened only slightly with relief at their return. Julian did not wait for any formal explanation, hurrying immediately toward the nursery, where Alice had been kept safely under constant watch throughout the entire ordeal. He found her exactly where he had left her that morning, curled in a window seat with a book open on her lap. Though her wide eyes, and the way she immediately launched herself into his arms, the moment he entered the room revealed clearly how frightened the earlier disturbance had truly left her. "I heard shouting," Alice said against his shoulder, her small voice trembling slightly despite her evident effort to remain brave. "Mr. Griggs said everything was fine, but I was still scared." "You are safe now, sweetheart," Julian murmured, holding her close with a fierce protectiveness that spoke louder than any words could manage. "The man who wished to harm us has been caught, and he will never trouble this family again. I promise you, this danger is finally, completely over." Alina stood in the doorway, watching the tender reunion with tears of relief gathering in her own eyes, the exhaustion of the entire harrowing day finally catching up with her all at once. Alice, spotting her over Julian's shoulder, reached out one small hand toward her as well, and Alina crossed the room quickly to join the embrace, the three of them holding tightly to one another in the quiet nursery, while the golden light of late afternoon spilled gently through the windows, marking the end of the darkest chapter this small, courageous family had ever been forced to face together. The trial of Lord Haldon took place 3 weeks later, drawing a crowd of curious onlookers from every corner of the county, eager to witness the downfall of a man who had once moved confidently through the highest circles of society. Alina sat beside Julian throughout the proceedings, her hand often finding his beneath the cover of her skirts whenever the testimony grew particularly difficult to hear, whenever Marsh described in detail the forgeries he had created, or when Mrs. Ferris, her voice shaking but steady, described the threats that had forced her cooperation. Haldon, stripped of his earlier confidence, sat pale and increasingly desperate as witness after witness confirmed the extent of his scheme, his attempts to interject and protest his innocence growing weaker with each new piece of damning evidence presented before the court. When the constables who had captured his hired attackers testified regarding the ambush upon the county road, several members of the gathered crowd gasped audibly, the brazen violence of the attempt shocking even those who had already heard whispered rumors of the unfolding scandal. Julian himself took the stand to explain, with quiet dignity rather than shame, the true circumstances surrounding Alice's birth, choosing this time to offer the truth openly and fully rather than allowing Haldon's twisted version to define the narrative any longer. "Alice is my daughter," he said clearly, his voice carrying steadily through the hushed courtroom, "born to a woman I loved deeply, whom circumstance did not allow me to marry before her untimely passing. I chose, out of love and a desire to protect an innocent child, to raise her within this family with honesty rather than deception." Lord Haldon sought to twist that honest love into a weapon for his own greed, threatening violence against a child, who has never known anything but genuine devotion from those who raise her. The courtroom remained silent for a long moment following his testimony, and Alina watched with cautious hope as the assembled crowd's expressions shifted gradually from curious judgment toward something closer to sympathy and quiet respect. Whatever scandal Haldon had hoped to weaponize against Julian's reputation seemed instead, through the simple power of honest testimony, to be transforming into growing admiration for a father who had fought so fiercely to protect his child from genuine danger. The magistrate's verdict, delivered at the conclusion of the 3-day trial, sentenced Haldon to a lengthy term of imprisonment for forgery, extortion, and conspiracy toward kidnapping, the violence of the roadside ambush weighing heavily against any argument for leniency. As constables led him from the courtroom in irons, Haldon cast one final, venomous glance toward Julian and Alina before disappearing through the side door, his schemes finally and completely unraveled, his influence within society permanently destroyed. Outside the courthouse, as the crowd began dispersing into the afternoon sunlight, several familiar faces from local society approached Julian with words of genuine sympathy and support, rather than the judgment he had long feared. Lady Ashcombe herself, present throughout much of the trial, took his hand warmly before departing. "You have shown remarkable courage these past weeks, Your Grace," she said. "Society sometimes forgets that honesty, however difficult, deserves far more respect than the comfortable silence of hidden shame." That evening, back at Ravenswood Hall, the household finally allowed itself to fully exhale, the tension of the preceding weeks slowly dissolving into quiet, exhausted relief. Alice, once she understood in gentle terms that the danger threatening her family had finally ended completely, seemed to grow lighter almost overnight, her laughter returning more freely, her sleep no longer troubled by the anxious watchfulness the household had maintained for so long. Elinor found Julian that evening standing alone in the garden, watching the last light of sunset fade slowly behind the distant hills, his shoulders finally relaxed for what felt like the first time in weeks. She approached quietly, and he turned at the sound of her footsteps, offering a tired but genuine smile as she joined him beside the old stone bench where so much of their shared story had unfolded. "It is truly finished," he said softly, more to himself than to her, as though needing to hear the words spoken aloud to fully believe them. "It is," Elinor confirmed, settling beside him. "Alice is safe, the truth stands openly acknowledged, and the man who threatened everything you love will trouble this family no longer." Julian turned to face her fully, something deeply tender softening his tired features. "None of it would have ended this way without you, Elinor. Your courage, your steadiness, your willingness to stand beside us through every danger we faced together. I do not know how to properly express what that has meant to me." "You do not need elaborate words," Elinor said gently, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I chose to stand beside you and Alice because I could not imagine choosing otherwise. Somewhere amid all the danger and fear these past weeks, I found that my heart had already decided where it belonged, long before my mind fully caught up to the realization." Julian's hand covered hers gently against his cheek, his eyes searching hers with quiet, hopeful intensity. "And where does your heart tell you it belongs, Elinor Hartley?" "Here," she whispered, her own voice trembling slightly with the honesty of the admission. "With you and with Alice for as long as you will have me." He drew her closer then, and this time, when their lips met beneath the fading colors of sunset, there was no danger forcing their hands, no threat demanding they perform affection for the sake of appearances. There was only the quiet, certain truth of two hearts that had weathered genuine danger together and found, on the other side of every fear, something far stronger than either of them had expected to discover. When they finally parted, Julian rested his forehead gently against hers, his breathing unsteady with emotion. "I find myself wanting to ask you something I have been considering for several days now, though I confess the timing has never felt quite right amid everything we have faced." "What is it?" Elinor asked softly, her heart already beginning to race with anticipation. "Marry me," Julian said simply, the words carrying none of the desperation of their earlier hallway confession, only steady, certain devotion. "Not because circumstance or danger demands it, but because I cannot imagine building the remainder of my life, or Alice's future, without you standing openly and permanently at our side." Tears filled Elinor's eyes as she nodded eagerly, unable to voice her answer through the overwhelming joy rising within her chest. "Yes, Julian, 1,000 times yes." He laughed, a sound of pure, unguarded happiness that Elinor had rarely heard from him throughout their entire acquaintance, and pulled her into another kiss, this one lighter, filled with laughter and relief rather than the desperate tension of danger finally past. Somewhere beyond the garden walls, the household continued its quiet evening routines, entirely unaware that their Duke had just secured, at long last, the happiness he had spent so many years believing might remain forever out of his reach. News of the engagement spread through Ravenswood Hall within a single day, met with genuine delight from every corner of the household. Mrs. Ferris, still carrying quiet gratitude for the mercy Julian had shown her despite her earlier unwilling betrayal, threw herself into wedding preparations with fierce determination, as though the effort might somehow help repay the kindness she had received. Mr. Griggs, ordinarily so reserved and formal, could not quite hide the warmth in his eyes whenever he passed Elena in the corridors, offering small nods of approval that meant more to her than elaborate words ever could. Alice, upon learning that Elena would soon become her mother in truth rather than simply in the quiet affection they already shared, could barely contain her excitement. She spent an entire afternoon drawing pictures of the wedding as she imagined it, filling page after page with flowers and birds, and somewhat inexplicably, a rather large cake that seemed to grow more elaborate with each new sketch. "Will you truly be my mother now?" Alice asked one evening, curled against Elena's side as they read together before bed. "Not just pretend, but truly and forever." "Truly and forever," Elena confirmed, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Nothing would make me happier, sweet girl." Alice smiled and settled more comfortably against her, the last shadows of the fear she had carried throughout the recent danger finally seeming to dissolve entirely into simple, uncomplicated childhood contentment. Elena watched her drift toward sleep with a swelling warmth in her chest, marveling at how completely her own life had transformed since that uncertain morning weeks earlier when a carriage had first carried her toward Ravenswood Hall, uncertain of what dangers or joys might await her at journey's end. The wedding itself took place on a bright morning in early autumn, held in the same gardens where Elena and Julian had shared their first honest confession of feeling beneath the fading colors of sunset. The ceremony was modest but joyful, attended by the small circle of friends who had stood loyally beside them throughout the recent danger, Captain Cole among the honored guests, his usually serious expression softened considerably by genuine happiness for the couple whose safety he had helped secure. Alice served as flower girl, scattering petals along the garden path with delighted enthusiasm, occasionally pausing to fling entire handfuls into the air simply for the joy of watching them fall, much to the amusement of the gathered guests. When the moment finally arrived for Julian and Elena to exchange their vows, the words carried a weight far deeper than simple ceremony, both of them keenly aware of exactly how much danger and courage had brought them to this precise, joyful moment together. "I promise to stand beside you," Julian said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "through whatever storms may come, exactly as you have already proven yourself willing to stand beside me and Alice through the darkest danger either of us has ever faced." "And I promise," Elena replied, her own voice thick with happy tears, "to choose honesty over comfortable silence, courage over convenient fear, and love over every obstacle that might attempt to stand against it, for as long as we both shall live." When Julian finally kissed his new bride before the assembled gathering, no hidden threat lurked nearby forcing the moment. No watching enemy waited to twist their affection into scandal. There was only pure, uncomplicated joy, celebrated openly beneath the warm autumn sun, surrounded by people who had witnessed firsthand exactly how much genuine love had triumphed over cruelty and deception. In the years that followed, Ravenswood Hall transformed steadily from a house once shadowed by secrets and fear into a home filled consistently with warmth, laughter, and the easy comfort of a family built upon honesty rather than concealment. Alice grew into a thoughtful, spirited young woman, secure always in the knowledge of exactly who she was, and how deeply she remained cherished by the parents who had fought so fiercely to protect her. 2 more children eventually joined the family, a son who inherited his father's steady determination, and a younger daughter who possessed her mother's quiet, unshakable courage. Lord Haldon served the full extent of his sentence, his once considerable influence within society permanently and completely destroyed, a distant, diminished memory by the time news occasionally reached Ravenswood Hall regarding his continued struggles following his eventual release. Elena felt no particular satisfaction in his continued misfortune, understanding by then that his downfall had been entirely of his own making, the inevitable consequence of choices rooted in cruelty rather than any genuine ambition worth admiring. Captain Cole remained a close and trusted friend to the family for many years afterward, occasionally visiting Ravenswood Hall to share news of his continued work protecting others from similarly dangerous schemes, always welcomed warmly by a household that remembered clearly the debt of gratitude they owed him for his steady courage during their darkest days. Marsh, having provided crucial testimony against Haldon, received considerable leniency for his own crimes, and eventually built a modest but honest living as a legitimate clerk in a neighboring county, occasionally sending brief, grateful letters expressing his continued appreciation for the mercy shown him. Elinor often found herself, during quiet evenings by the fire with Julian, reflecting on how remarkably their lives had transformed from those first frightening weeks when danger had seemed to lurk around every corner of their carefully guarded existence. The household that had once trembled beneath the weight of hidden threats now stood instead as a testament to what genuine courage, honest love, and unwavering loyalty could ultimately overcome, even against the most calculated and cruel opposition. "Do you ever think back to that first night?" Julian asked one such evening years later, watching their children play together in the garden beyond the window, "when I pulled you into the shadows and warned you to remain silent." Elinor smiled, resting her head against his shoulder as she watched their family laughing together beneath the warm afternoon light. "Often, I remember being so afraid, certain I had stumbled into something far too dangerous for a simple governess to survive." "And yet you stayed," Julian said softly, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "And yet I stayed," Elinor agreed, her voice warm with quiet certainty. "Because somewhere within that very first frightening moment I sensed something worth fighting for, something worth every risk that followed. I have never once regretted that choice, Julian, not for a single day since." Together they watched their children continue their joyful play beneath the golden afternoon sun, every shadow of the danger and secrecy that had once haunted Ravenswood Hall now completely replaced by light, laughter, and the enduring, hard-won piece of a family who had faced genuine darkness together and emerged, through courage and unwavering love, entirely and permanently victorious. 15 years after the trial that finally ended Lord Haldon's schemes, Ravenswood Hall received an unexpected letter that briefly threatened to disturb the peace the family had worked so hard to build. It arrived on an ordinary autumn morning, carried by the regular post along with the usual correspondence, and Julian did not think much of it until he broke the seal and recognized, with a jolt of unwelcome memory, the cramped, familiar handwriting. Haldon was dead, the letter explained, having succumbed to illness within the walls of the prison where he had spent his final years following his release and subsequent return to custody for further crimes committed against other unsuspecting families. The letter came from the prison chaplain, informing Julian, as the man whose testimony had originally secured Haldon's conviction, that certain personal effects had been left behind, along with a sealed note addressed specifically to the Duke of Ravenswood. Elinor watched her husband's face carefully as he read the accompanying note in silence, his expression unreadable for several long moments before he finally set the paper down upon his desk. "He offers something resembling an apology," Julian said quietly, clearly surprised by the admission. "He claims that prison gave him considerable time to reflect upon the cruelty of his actions, particularly regarding the danger he placed Alice in as a child. He asks that I convey his regret to her directly, though he does not expect forgiveness." "Will you tell her?" Elinor asked gently. Julian considered this for a long moment. "I believe I should. Alice deserves to make her own choice regarding what, if anything, she wishes to feel about this news, rather than having that choice made for her through continued silence." That evening they gathered Alice, now a poised young woman of 22, recently returned from an extended visit with her husband's family, and explained the contents of the letter with careful honesty. Alice listened quietly, her expression thoughtful rather than distressed, the fear that man had once inspired in her as a frightened child long since faded into distant, manageable memory. I do not think I need to forgive him, Alice said finally, though I find I do not carry the anger toward him I once expected I might, should this day ever come. He tried to steal something precious from our family, and he failed entirely, because the people who loved me fought harder than his cruelty ever could. That victory belongs to all of us, not to him, and I refuse to let his final words carry more weight than the happiness we built despite everything he attempted to destroy. Julian's eyes shone with quiet pride as he listened to his daughter's measured, thoughtful response, recognizing in her steady composure the same courage Alina had shown so many years earlier, standing firm against danger rather than allowing fear to dictate her choices. "Well spoken," he said softly. "I could not have expressed it more perfectly myself." The letter was filed away quietly afterward, a final closing chapter to a danger that had once threatened to consume everything the family held dear, now reduced to nothing more than a brief, unremarkable footnote within the much larger, far happier story they had continued building together in the years since. Alina found herself, that evening, walking alone through the familiar garden paths, past the old stone bench where so many pivotal moments of her own story had unfolded, reflecting on the strange, winding journey that had carried her from a frightened, uncertain governess to the settled, contented matriarch of a family she loved beyond measure. Julian found her there as the sun began sinking toward the horizon, joining her quietly on the worn stone bench without need for words to explain his presence. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while, watching the sky shift slowly through shades of gold and amber, the same colors that had painted so many significant moments throughout their shared history. "We built something remarkable together," Julian said eventually, taking her hand gently in his. "We did," Alina agreed, resting her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady, familiar comfort of decades spent building trust upon trust, courage upon courage, until the foundation beneath their family had grown far too strong for any remaining shadow to ever threaten it seriously again. In the years that followed, Alice's own children would sometimes ask their grandmother to tell them the story of how their grandparents had first found each other, drawn in by the whispered promise of danger and secrecy that had once shaped the family's earliest, most difficult days together. Alina always told the tale with the same steady honesty Julian had first shown that difficult night at the courthouse, emphasizing not the fear that had once threatened to consume them, but the courage it had taken to face genuine danger openly, together, rather than allowing threats and secrets to dictate the shape of their family's future. "The bravest thing anyone can do," she would tell her grandchildren, settling them close beside the very fireplace where she and Julian had spent so many quiet evenings together throughout the years, "is choose honesty and love even when fear whispers that hiding might feel safer. Every danger we faced together only made the happiness we built afterward feel that much more precious, that much more thoroughly earned." And as the fire crackled warmly before them, casting familiar golden light across the walls of the home that had witnessed both their darkest fears and their most enduring joys, Alina understood, with the settled certainty of many contented years, that every frightening moment of that first difficult season had ultimately led them exactly where they were always meant to arrive, together, unafraid and completely, irrevocably home.